Our Bible reading plan has brought us to the book of Philippians. And as always, we want to understand some of the background and ask some important questions about this book so that we can understand it better when we get into it and so that we can more fully apply it to our lives as we read and be transformed by it. So we know that the letter to the Philippians was written by Paul, and it is exactly that. It's a letter, and it's written to Christians in the city of Philippi. And the city of Philippi is a place that we know wasn't super friendly to Christians. And the situation surrounding this, if you read in Philippians 1, it shows us that Paul himself is in prison at the time that he's writing this letter, and he's writing it to Philippians who seem to also be suffering. You see, Paul had planted the church at Philippi. Most of the people he's writing to in Philippi are Christians because Paul obeyed the call of Christ as a missionary to go and to take the gospel to people who had never heard it. He shows up to this city of Philippi, he preaches the gospel, and people get saved. But while he's there, you can see this in Acts chapter 16. While he's there, he's persecuted. He's actually thrown in prison. But in his time in prison, he suffers well. He's praising the Lord in prison, and it ends up leading to the salvation of more people. So when he finally leaves the city of Philippi, there's actually a church that he leaves behind, and those are the people he's writing to here. Now, it's important to understand this background of suffering because much of what he writes about in the book of Philippians is surrounding this idea of suffering. But the overall idea that Paul is trying to convey is he wants the Philippians to grow in their faith in a way that helps them to be unified as a church together and also focused on the mission to those outside of the church, despite the suffering that may come their way and despite the difficulties that come with being a Christian in the city of Philippi. Paul wants them to live selflessly because they are setting their minds on Christ and looking forward to the promised inheritance and to eternity. So there's this idea of harmony within the church and also mission towards the outside of the church, no matter what suffering is going on because of it. And all of this is built off of this background where Paul himself suffered well, and it helped many of these people that he's writing to become Christians in the first place. So why does Philippians matter to me? Why should I read it in 21st century America? Well, for one thing, maybe you've got problems in your life. I think all of us can relate to that. Many of us are struggling in different ways, and Philippians helps us to learn how to suffer well. Our struggles may not look like the struggles of the Philippians, but Paul does teach us some important lessons to help us understand how to walk through a struggle in a way that honors God and actually displays the gospel to the people around us. Maybe you have disagreements or frustrations with other Christians. Maybe they're in your church or at churches in the area. A lot of the time, our disagreements and our frustrations with other Christians can boil up to a point that it's really not honoring to God how we're disagreeing with one another. And Paul gives us some instructions for how to love one another well and how to relate to other Christians even in the midst of struggle and disagreement. Also, this book really helps us understand what matters most in life. Paul emphasizes the fact that Christ is better than life or anything else in life. Christ is the one that we ought to live our lives for, and that everything else is worthless in comparison to Christ. This is so important for us to understand because as we walk through this life, we'll encounter suffering, we'll encounter disagreements with Christians, we'll encounter difficulties. But if our eyes are fixed forward on Christ and on eternity, that is so much more valuable than any of the things in this world. It helps us to live in unity with the Christians around us and on mission to those who don't believe around us. I look forward to studying the book of Philippians with you.